Before we dive into today's chaotic parenting topic, this episode of Dumb Smart Mums is proudly brought to you by our absolute favourites, CF Creation. They have a vast range of gorgeous full-length mirrors. Now, Charlotte, you know I'm obsessed with mine. I actually have their mirror in my house, and let me tell you, not only does it survive my 2 toddlers, but it means that I can feed the people with my outfit of the day content on Instagram, and for that we are truly grateful.
That is a literal miracle. And mums, if you want to upgrade your space, you need to check them out. They are actual manufacturers, meaning they've completely cut out the middleman and all those sneaky extra retail markups. So you get premium quality without the premium price tag. Stay tuned because we've got an amazing exclusive launch offer coming up later in the episode.
The way some people talk about formula,
And the stay-at-home
giving
mums
my
and the working mums.
I
feel like I should have a purchase. Please tell me if I should have a baby.
Here we are. We're recording. It's happening. I'm still shitting myself.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I promise. You need to remember also you can just ignore DMs.
Oh, yeah.
You can just
I'm
ignore
not
them.
famous enough to ignore the
You
DMs
just-
yet, Charlotte.
You can just ignore them. You can
I need
just
to get
leave
so
them
much more
unseen.
famous before I can do that.
No, you just ignore them.
Easy. Okay, here we are. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
This is crazy. People listen.
Episode 2. I know. So exciting. Thank you, everybody, for listening to our first episode.
I know. We kept on, we're being very mindful about not paying too much attention to numbers, but I kept on checking the numbers and updating Charlotte and being like, can you believe this? Can you believe this?
Like, there's no way this is actually happening.
This
there's
cannot
just no
be
way.
true. Oh. Quick caveat is that I'm at my family's batch and I'm just recording fully in a wooden sleep out. So if the voice sounds weirder than usual, it's because I don't have a podcast studio at my batch. I'm so sorry.
And my caveat is that I have been sick this week. So I'm very sniffy and very coughy and croaky. And I still also don't have a microphone or a nice backdrop. So that's my caveat.
So guys, just deal with it, okay?
We're
That's all I
professional
have to say about that. Someone's actually paid us to do this episode, and you'll have heard that ad at the beginning, so people have paid us to do this. No big deal. I keep telling Charlotte that I'm shitting myself because this is my first week doing an episode, and I've picked quite a controversial topic because why wouldn't I do that? And at first I was like, oh, such a good idea. I'll pick a really controversial one. It'll be so interesting and I'll love talking to Charlotte about that. And then I was like, oh, yeah, but now I've got to talk about a controversial topic in a way that's going to piss some people off.
Especially when you know how many people listen to the first episode.
I know. Really lovely to have such a good amount of followers. But I know that, some of those people are really not going to agree with what I have to say here. Ooh.
We will get comfy.
We will get comfy.
We will get comfy with the uncomfiness.
Yes, that there are very few topics in the parenting realm that everybody is going to agree with at all times. In fact, they're probably none other than keep your child alive, I guess. So we're just going to have to be okay with the discomfort. And if you hate this episode, it's so okay to just scroll past it.
Just keep on going. You can listen to the first 5 minutes and go,
nope. What is funny is that the people that I told that I was going to do this episode this week, their reactions made it sound like they expect me and Charlotte to have a fight. There were 3 people that I spoke to this week when they asked what this episode was, and they were like, oh, how's that going to be for you and Charlotte? And I was like, I really hope that we don't break up on episode 2.
Can you imagine if we just disagreed so horribly?
They were this is the one.
I am actually excited for when we first disagree with each other on little points, because I think it's actually really important to show that women and mothers and people can disagree on things in a respectful way where it's we just don't agree on this point of view. But I respect your point of view and you respect my point of view, and we've had an interesting discussion about it. One of the most stimulating things for me academically is to look at something or talk with somebody and be like, I don't agree, but my argument as to why I don't agree yet isn't strong enough, so I need to go away and think about this more deeply. and figure out
Yes.
why I feel so strongly the way I feel,
Yes.
instead of channeling that into anger and frustration that you don't agree. Channel it into
Yeah.
figuring out exactly why you don't agree and make your point stronger. So
Yes, that is like really good advice.
Done smart moms.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the saying, breast is best.
woo!
Hold for everyone going, ooh, that's a big topic. Hold for everyone going, ugh. So it's just a nice and chill, non-controversial one for my first episode. I just thought I'll go light and fluffy and something that's going to make nobody mad. Here we go. Is everyone ready? Everyone got their cups of teas? Everyone ready to hold lots of nuance? Great. So, obviously, as with every single episode I think that will ever exist of this podcast, there are some caveats and things I want to say before I start this episode, which is that obviously not everyone who breastfeeds is a woman or a mother, and that breastfeeding is not a word that some people identify with, and that's totally okay. But a lot of the research, obviously, that we look at and that we have exclusively refers to mothers and breastfeeding. And I've tried to adapt the language to be as inclusive as possible to like all iterations of feeding kinds and genders of people who might be doing the feeding. But there will be moments that I have missed that, and that gendered language remains in there. Obviously, it is a very gendered topic, and so it's hard to keep the fact that this predominantly does affect women and mothers at the centre, while also making everybody feel inclusive of everyone's experience. So I've kind of like chopped and changed language to try and like include everyone, because we acknowledge that it's not just women and mothers who are breastfeeding. And then 2, I obviously work in a health setting, which is quite like a strange place to sit when I'm going to come in and probably criticize some of the like health policies that we have, or like health decisions that have been made, while also knowing that health are my employer. So like, because health has very strong policies and directives on feeding babies and methods of feeding babies, and I work specifically in the maternity space. So like, that is something that I know a lot about, or have been told very clearly about. So I just want to make it really clear that all the opinions and information that I have shared in this episode do not reflect the opinions or beliefs of my employer, and that this episode is being shared by me, Abby, the private citizen, in my own time, separately from who I am at work. And actually, to be honest, I don't think my employer would be furious about what I'm saying in this episode, so that's good. But just in case anyone is like, that's wrong, I'm going to email her manager. My manager won't care. My manager won't care. So just to clear that up. And obviously, while I'm at work, I follow the processes that have been laid out to us by Health New Zealand. But also, I'm a social worker, so I don't actually really talk to people about breastfeeding very much. I kind of just leave that to the experts, like lactation consultants and midwives, etc., etc. The other thing that I want to acknowledge is that there are going to be some words that I try and say without feeling weird, like secrete and lobule and areola and stimulation. And I've realized writing this episode that I am no better than a 14-year-old at heart, because I still want to giggle every time I say any of those words. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there are silly words incoming and I feel weird saying them. So if I suddenly sound like a robot, that's why. And then the last caveat before we can finally get into the episode is that obviously, like, we come into this episode very non-judgmentally of how you fed your baby. Like, however you did that, we are proud of you. You fed a baby. That's incredible. And also, like, Charlotte and I come to this episode with very different baby feeding journeys. So for me, personally, a little very brief overview without going into details about why I made the decisions that I did, although I'm sure we will talk about those decisions. I breastfed my son, who was my oldest, for about 10 weeks, then exclusively pumped and bottle fed with him for about 8 months. And then with my daughter, I breastfed for about 4 months and then switched to formula. And then, Charlotte, would you like to share a little overview of your journey?
Sure. My first daughter was exclusively breastfed. I always knew I wanted to breastfeed, but always thought that my baby would also just take a bottle. And at some points would have been great if she took a pacifier. She said absolutely nope to both of those things. So then I ended up in the situation of a baby that for the first 2 years of her life I could not be away from for periods of time, which is its own different kind of difficulty, I guess. So yeah, she was exclusively breastfed until she was 2. And then I had my second baby when she was 2. And she was exclusively breastfed to start with, but we introduced a bottle so that, because I was like, I'm not doing that again. And she took a bottle, she took a pacifier, and then she weaned herself at 10 months old. She started daycare around 5 months old. And I have the body where, which I didn't know was a thing, where I make heaps of milk. I'm very, very lucky. But it doesn't work with a pump. So my body doesn't respond to the pump in the same way that it does to my baby. So once I was back at work, my supply dropped. My baby got very cranky. She got very angry with me, and she wanted a formula bottle. So she was fully formula from 10 months old.
Yeah. So I guess like knowing that is like such a complex conversation, it's obviously going to be impossible for me to talk about it without separating our own experiences of it. Like we both carry baggage into this conversation because we've both fed babies, right? So with most of the topics we talk about, we're going to have baggage going into the conversation because we have a vested interest in the topics that we talk about. But if you disagree with something that I say, obviously that's okay, because these discussions and topics aren't black and white. It's nuanced and it's emotive and it carries stuff with it. And so we go into this knowing that we aren't going to be like, here is the correct baby, here is the correct way to feed your baby, and it is like this. That's just not how this is going to go. Okay, so that is all the caveats. That's everything up front.
I might have an extra caveat to add.
Oh, go. Yes, please.
I'm not sure how much you're going to talk about like healthcare workers and stuff like that, but obviously acknowledging that we are in an incredibly underfunded, understaffed, stretched, stressful healthcare situation for our health workers, and obviously not at all shitting on the work that individual healthcare workers are doing. So just want to say that as well.
No. And actually, in preparing for this episode, I had really amazing conversations with some of my colleagues, but like some other healthcare professionals, some of whom I actually mentioned on the episode. But and I was really nervous to bring up the topic with them, especially like, you know, lactation consultants and people who like I know believe that breast is best. And I was really blown away by how nuanced they spoke about it, how compassionate they were, how holistically minded they were about it. And I went away and was like, of course they are. Like, they're the experts. They're literally lactation consultants. They know the ins and outs of this topic. They know it's heavy. They know it's big. And so I think, you know, it's really easy to shit on individual professionals, but realistically, there's a whole wider system, and we know that healthcare workers are doing their absolute best to provide the best with what they've got. So yes, that is a very good caveat, and one that I forgot despite being a healthcare professional, so that's good. Okay, so Charlotte Kells Robertson, you have been to antenatal classes, you have successfully breastfed 2 babies, you have lactated like an absolute legend, some would say. You are very knowledgeable on the subject. So to your best ability, can you please explain to me what is breastfeeding? Like physiologically, what is happening that allows you to lactate and provide milk to your babies through your body?
Can I tell you, I actually didn't go to antenatal classes because I had my first baby. I had my first baby in 2020. I have a horror story. I have an antenatal horror story. I went to one class and was so uncomfortable in that class. And the only thing I remember her saying to the class is that it's not normal at any point in your labor and birth to bleed. And that stuck in my brain, which led to me losing my mind like a lunatic when I saw blood during my labor and my poor midwife having to calm me down. Went to that one class, didn't love the vibe. Then we went into lockdown and it was over Zoom and I was like, I'll figure it out. So I didn't actually go to antenatal classes, and I'm actually a bit of a shocker in terms of how it works physiologically, because again, I was really lucky. Like my mum and my older sister were also great breastfeeders. Like, it just happened.
Mm.
When I mentioned it to my mum when I was pregnant, she was like, you don't even need to worry about this. You're going to be able to breastfeed. And so I didn't think that much about it. And I put my baby on my boob, and it all worked really well. And I had too much milk. So I was never in that horrible position of it not working and being down a Google rabbit hole trying to figure out exactly how everything was working and how to improve things and all of that. So my understanding of breastfeeding is you start making milk when you're pregnant, colostrum. Sometimes you can squeeze out some colostrum before your baby's born, which I also never did.
My gosh, I did. I was psychotic about it. But I'm glad that I did, because I used them, like, I took heaps of colostrum to hospital, and we ended up both times having to use all of it for, like, various different reasons. So I was glad I did.
Again, I was really lucky none of that happened. I really blocked out, again, the COVID of it all and the uncertainty. I really blocked out birth and, like, the final part of my pregnancy. With my first, I was just like, da-da-da-da-da. It'll happen.
It's fine.
And then, again, very lucky that it was just fine. But I know that you can do that. And then I know you start feeding your baby, and at first they get colostrum, and then they cluster feed lots. And then I got horrible swollen, engorged boobs when my milk came in, and I put cabbage leaves on my boobs, and then it went down eventually and it was fine. And I would have to lie on my back to breastfeed my babies, because or else they would choke on too much milk.
Because you had so much milk.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm a dickhead bragging. It's actually quite hard also if you have a lot of milk, because
there's like, I just don't think that there are many breastfeeding journeys where it's like, I put the baby on my boob and I made the perfect amount of milk and they latched perfectly and everything was fine. Like, I just don't think that exists. There are issues that come from overproduction. There are issues that come from underproduction. Like, there's no winning.
Both my postpartums, when my milk came in, I was like, as it was happening, the 2 days or so, the 48 hours that was happening, I was like, I will give birth again. Like, I would rather give birth again than have to deal with this feeling. It's awful for me. It's so painful. I get so engorged. It's horrific. Yeah, it's not fun. But yeah, physiologically, tell me the ins and outs.
Disappointed that you don't know more, but also I think
really
it's hilarious. No, because it's like there's this like incredibly complex, beautiful, like physiological thing happening in our body, and we're just like, yeah, and everyone's just like, yeah, it's supernatural, it just happens. But like the complexity behind it is so interesting. Okay,
I do know that it's really under researched. And so that probably trickles down into people's understanding of it. I remember at one point in time, it's probably still the case, but I remember seeing a study that there's more studies on cow's milk than we have on human breast milk.
Oh, 100%.
And lactation. So I think that also trickles down to people. Like, we actually, surprisingly for where we are in time, don't know a heap. We don't know as much as we should.
I would say that's probably not like an accident. Like, I think that would come back to patriarchy in a pretty significant way. Because I think if we started to look at actually, like, how significant a process it is, then we have to acknowledge what a significant process it is. But that's a story that I'm sure we'll talk about a lot today and in future episodes. So, according to the Cleveland Clinic, and then further confirmed by friend of the pod and absolute legend, Dr. Beth Shaw, who I sent chaotic voice notes to while writing this episode, including one that I couldn't figure out how to stop the voice note. So it was like, how do I stop this? Fuck, I don't know. What's a poor Beth on the other end of the phone? Must have been like, Abby, I'm a GP. Like, I've got serious work to do here, babe. So shout out to Beth, who is a GP in New Zealand with sort of like further expertise in breastfeeding and lactation. So she is just an amazing wealth of knowledge, and I will link her Instagram in the show notes so that if you are interested in like really beautiful evidence-based health information and posts, particularly around baby feeding, Beth is such a good follow. So she was my get her sign off on to make sure that all of this is right. So breastfeeding and lactation is the process of producing and releasing milk from the mammary glands in your breasts. Lactation begins in pregnancy when the hormonal changes signal the mammary glands to make milk in preparation for the birth of the baby. But this can also be induced in a non-pregnant person using hormonal induction. So it all comes from your hormones. Breast milk comes from the mammary glands inside breasts. Inside the mammary glands, there are a few different parts that are producing and secreting milk, and they are called alveoli, which are like these tiny little funky like grape bunch looking things. And basically that's where the milk is produced and stored. And so a cluster of alveoli is called a lobule, and each lobe is a collection of lobules. I really fell down the rabbit hole here. I was like, I need to understand what's happening. What is actually occurring? So then you have your milk ducts, and each lobe connects to a milk duct. You have multiple lobes which connect to milk ducts. These are like the little tiny tubes that carry the milk from the lobes to the nipple. And there are lots and lots of lots and lots of ducts that are interlacing, and they kind of look like a little braided river. Milk ducts carry the milk from the lobules of your alveoli to your nipples. And so then we've got the areola, which is the part of my body that nobody warned me would change quite so much during pregnancy. And can I say, what a shock. What a shock to my newly pregnant self when at about 16 weeks I didn't recognize my nipples anymore.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And even when it happened in my second pregnancy, I was like, wait, what?
I know.
It's like I forgot between pregnancies.
Yeah. And then I'm kind of like, I'm 18 months postpartum now, and I'm like, if they wanted to go back at any time, that would be fine.
Did yours not? So mine did between. That's why I got a fright when it happened again. I almost forgot that it happened in the first place.
They changed again in second pregnancy, but we're still working with a body that clearly thinks I'm going to be feeding a newborn at some stage that needs a real good target, but chill out. He's got the slits. Not happening.
It's just your body being like, come on, we could do one more.
Come on, you're not even 30 yet. Get one more out. Absolutely not. Okay, so the areola is the dark area around your nipple, and it's sensitive because it has a bunch of nerve endings. And then when the areola is stimulated, which is a word I just hate so much.
Really?
Yes, I don't know why.
Doesn't bother me.
There's just something about it that I'm like, stimulation equals sex. Like, I just think it's back to the Christian guilt of it all, I think.
I was just about to say, and that's your Christian self kicks in. It's like, we can't think of sex ever.
We cannot be talking about stimulation, especially to do with nipples. Anyway, so when the areola is stimulated, that is when your body knows that it needs to release milk. So then we've got the star of the show, in my opinion, which is the nipple. And your nipple has a bunch of tiny openings, which, I didn't know this, but the amount varies from breast to breast. There you go. Some people have heaps of openings, some have less, and Beth made a funny comment about, like, it literally just depends, and you can tell based on, like, the stream that hits your baby's face of, like, how many openings you've got. That some people, like, it's like, a little sieve, and some people it's not so much. Anyway.
That's so interesting.
A bunch of tiny openings, the amount varying, and that obviously secretes milk. Nerves on your nipples respond to suckling or stimulation, either by your baby, your hands, or a pump. And then the stimulation tells your brain to release milk from the alveoli through the milk ducts and out of your nipples. Voila, you are lactating. Your body is capable of sustaining a whole other life. What a miracle. How do you feel about the fact that you have done that process has happened in your body many times?
I just have trouble, like, connecting it with my own body, to be honest. Like, even though I know logically that's happened, it's like when I'm thinking about pregnancy and that whole process, and I'm like, I actually just can't fathom that. Like, I can look at it on, like, a scientific biological level and be like, wow, that's incredible. Yes. But then when I think about myself, I'm like, nah, I can't make those things match up.
I know. You like, there's like those classic like diagrams that you see of like a lactating breast that like I've looked at so many of them in preparation for this episode, and like looking at it and being like, no, that's not in my boobs. My boobs are just a little sack of fat. Like, you just like, I'm like, they're not
just
that
there.
clever. Yeah, they just hang off my chest and just cause issues and generally annoy me. They're not actually
just
useful
cause-
for anything.
They just cause my chronic back pain.
Man, I know. Do you know, actually, the other day, I had a shower and I was putting my bra on, and Freddie was like, "Why do you wear that?" And I was like, "Because these are so heavy and they hurt my back so much." He was like, "Are they?" Like, he was shocked. And I was like, "And you're never going to know. You're never going to understand." Must be nice.
Must be
Okay.
nice.
Must be nice. Male privilege starts so early. Okay, so I have separated this kind of into two parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about like the history of breastfeeding and formula. And then the second part, I've kind of like contextualized it to New Zealand a little bit more because like most of our listeners are New Zealand based. We are New Zealand based. But there's obviously lots of transferable stuff because New Zealand's trends, etc., tend to mimic that of like the UK, America, Australia. So very much like transferable stuff, but I have contextualized it a little bit because it's more interesting to me, and at the end of the day this is just a fun little thing that I do for myself, so deal with it if you're overseas. So sorry, you're going to learn something about New Zealand's culture around breastfeeding.
It's interesting though. We have a very specific culture of
Yes.
breastfeeding here compared to other countries. Like it is very unique. So I think that is actually interesting.
Yeah, I think so too, and like and more so now than it has been historically as well. Like we followed the trends and have now sort of settled in our own like unique space, which is funny that we follow trends for so many other things and then this we've like stayed really robust on, but we'll talk about why that's happened. So obviously the history of lactation and breastfeeding like predates the dawn of man, or whatever, because it's existed since mammals existed, and I grew up Christian, so I don't have too much understanding of like how that all works, because in my opinion, the world started 2,000 years ago when Jesus was born, and that's all I know. So
Evolution is a huge gap for you.
to be clear, my parents do believe in evolution. I just don't think any of us in our family generally had any good understanding of it. And I didn't pay attention in science. And now I'm a social worker, so it doesn't matter. So doing a history of breastfeeding would take like 3 or 4 or 10 episodes worth of time if we were going to go back right to the beginning. But when I was looking into like infant feeding and all its history, there's obviously a lot of discussion around alternative methods of feeding because, surprise, surprise, breastfeeding parents need support. Or, shock horror, breastfeeding has not always worked out for mothers, which, wow, I know, guys. What a surprise, because it's so natural and it just works for everyone. But the oldest medical encyclopedia on record, which is the Papyrus Ebers of Egypt, described lactation failure and actually recommends surrogate nursing as a solution. So that's like what we call wet nursing. So we get into the idea of wet nursing, which was originally like quite a charitable thing, or like very much existed in collectivist cultures. So it was kind of like if there was a mum who was struggling to breastfeed her baby, like someone else who was lactating would just like feed that baby. And it was very much just like we're all just going to do our bit to make sure that this little infant is getting fed. And then it later became a profession, particularly in like white cultures. And like eventually wet nursing got to the stage where it was like regulated and legalized, and there were like bureaus of wet nurses, and people would like interview their wet nurses, and it was like a whole thing. I think I talk about this later, but apparently brunettes were wanted more over blondes because blondes didn't have as nutritional milk. Their milk was too light, and brunettes was more balanced.
I wanna talk to someone about that.
No, so I'm like, this blonde overproducer we've got here.
my sickly children from their weak milk.
Yeah, from that light and non-balanced milk from their blonde mother. But then obviously, like, yes, wet nursing was a profession, but also is historically incredibly tied up with like slavery and servantry, which I did not have time to get into today, but was super interesting and something that I would like to read more about. And I feel like there's an episode in like the slavery of motherhood, or like motherhood slaves. Like there's something in there that I would like to tease out and probably will mention at that stage, but I didn't get into it today. So let's just acknowledge that there's like a whole other part that's not talked about. Anyway, so what was interesting about the existence of wet nursing as a profession, to me anyway, was like there was a time that there was a societal acknowledgement of the amount of labour that exists in lactation and breastfeeding. Like there was a time that we could all be like, that is a job, which it feels like we maybe don't have anymore.
No, that seems to have gone.
Yeah. And so I was quite like, I think in my head, I'd always thought that wet nurses were enslaved and forced to do it. But it was like a profession with a salary and was not always respected, like pretty much always had a stigma attached to it, but had enough pay that it was worth like doing. So, for example, in the European aristocracy between the 16th and 18th century, sometimes people of high class would have one or sometimes even two employed wet nurses because breastfeeding was considered so much labour that it interfered with the demands of life, which this part cracked me up because it was like the demands of life in bracket playing cards, going to the theatre, and interrupted the being able to wear the fashions of the time. And I was like, God, that must be nice.
I know I'm a feminist, and I know that there's so many bad things about certain time periods, but sometimes I just see like what a medieval lady had to do in a day, or like maybe like actually peak would be like an Edwardian, a rich Edwardian lady.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, it'd be nice.
I was like, wow, they had two employed wet nurses because she couldn't possibly breastfeed her baby whilst playing cards. Oh, and then now we're like, you get 6 weeks and then go back to work, but still breastfeed your baby. But yeah, so very interesting to me that we seem to have forgotten that it was so much labour that it was considered a profession when they'd figured that out a really long time ago. And then, ding, 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 take a shot, because it was during the Industrial Revolution, which we talked about last episode, and the rise of poverty, basically, that came as a result of Industrial Revolution because wealth imbalance came as a result of Industrial Revolution so much more, like poverty increased, blah, blah, blah. That career wet nurses had to find higher paying employment because wet nursing didn't always it wasn't a well-paid job, but it was a job. And then suddenly wet nurses were having to go to higher paid employment. So like wet nurses were then having to figure out if they were going to find their own wet nurses, and it kind of like got a bit like that's sort of when we lost the idea of wet nursing. And that's when we saw the societal shift of breastfeeding as well. So there were like, at that time was when we saw huge leaps in technological advancement in the area of like bottles, formula, pumps, etc. It's all very complex, but the point is that breastfeeding has always been layered and not as simple as pop baby on boob, baby is fed, baby is well. Like, that's just not. And this is where I was going to talk to you about how your milk is very unbalanced and has affected your children's disposition forever. Because
Ruined.
apparently, yeah, they're ruined. It's like I wrote here, wet nurses were selected very carefully because they believed that the milk that the baby received would determine their future disposition.
That's interesting though, because there's something in how we still like obsess over breast is breast. Breast is best in that whole, like, if you don't exclusively feed your baby right now, in the future, something bad is going to happen. So I think that there's still something like alive there in that belief that they needed the best milk. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think like now we justify it with some stuff that I'll talk about later on in the episode about, especially like the problem with breast milk being so under-researched is that we're in the beginnings of all this stuff. And so, like, there's new stuff coming out and people are like, well, we're starting to find out that blah, 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 blah. And it's, like, not backed up with heaps of evidence. So there's, like, little glimmers of more research about breast milk. And breast milk is a wondrous thing. Like, it truly is magic. Like, the things I've read about what breast milk can do, incredible. But it does mean that, like, there is so much pressure on getting this like magic thing into your child, and very much like in the future your child's going to be celiac or is going to have like bad microbiome or whatever whatever fancy words they use, gut health, and it's going to be, you know, like I'm like so terrified that one of my children one day is going to like have bad gut health and turn around and be like, well, it's because I didn't get as much breast milk as stuff until 2 years old, Mum. Like the World Health Organization were telling you.
The things my children have put into their bodies over their 4 and 6 years of life, I am sorry, it is not a lack of breast milk that has ruined their gut. It is everything
Literal
else.
mud. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, my daughter is in a phase of like sitting in sand pits and eating sand by the like handful, which apparently I did as a child. I know, and look, it comes out the other end, and it's not fun. Terrible.
Oh,
Irrigation.
I've never had sand eaters.
It's not good. It's not good. It's my karma because I was one. My parents were saying they used to watch me eat sand and they would see like cigarette butts, because obviously 90s child, in the sand, and they were just like, Abby. So if I get lung cancer, isn't she a funny girl?
No, but if that happens, it's because of the breast milk. It's not because of the literal cigarette butts you were eating.
No, because my mum breastfed me, so I will be fine. I've got.
She's a superior woman to you.
She's a superior woman, and it's funny. My mum was actually similar to your mum, that she was just like, it will be fine. My mum was like found breastfeeding very easy, and was similar to you in that like her midwives used to joke that she was making like full fat cream and all this stuff because we were such massive babies, you know, like she had such an easy time of it. So when I was like, I wonder how breastfeeding will go, she was like, yeah, you'll be fine, it's all good. So that was like quite an interesting, like almost not guilt, but there was like, there's something wrong with me because all the other women in my family have managed to do it. Like that was quite an interesting identity shift for me.
My version of that was giving birth for the first time. So my mum had 4 babies, no epidural, and I really didn't realize how much I took that on as a kid, of like, that's how you give birth. Like that is how you give birth. That's how mum did it. I was very fortunate to be at the birth of my first niece, my older sister's first baby, and again, no epidural. She went through a whole long, awful induction, still no epidural, had her second baby very quickly, and then it was my turn, and I was just like, give me the fucking epidural. I need it.
You were like, why has anyone done it like this?
36-hour labor, 30 hours in, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Everybody in the room agreed that that's what I needed. And afterwards, I just felt so devastated I hadn't done it the proper way, because I just thought that that's... And nobody sat me down in my family and was like, this is how you will give birth. I just didn't realize how much I had taken
you just absorb it.
that on. And as you said, it's like a identity shift. And then I remember talking to my mum about it, and she was like, oh, Charles, it's not that I thought that it was the best way. It was that I'm so terrified of needles that the idea of an epidural needle going into my back was so distressing for me that I was like, I'd rather just do it myself. And so I'd built this whole identity off something that wasn't even true.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't even my mum's belief.
Yeah. I remember my mum saying to me once, like, you and Josh, who's my brother, you and Josh, like, you wouldn't take a bottle, you wouldn't take a dummy. We tried so hard, like your oldest, like, she was like, we desperately wanted you to be able to take a bottle. You just didn't take one. If you wanted to be fed, we just had to breastfeed you. So, like, it is that thing of you absorb it because you hear it. But really, when you're talking about, like, the nuance behind the decisions that were made, there's, like, all the stuff that we don't see. We just get, like, the headline version of what it is. But that's what you hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, historically, obviously, breastfeeding was absolutely the safest way to feed a human, which is why wet nurses were like the recommended option if a mum wasn't able to breastfeed or was too high status to breastfeed, which is going to be my new reason that I chose not to breastfeed. I'm just going to tell people I was too high status, and that's not for me. I'm too important.
You're too much of a lady.
I'm too much of a lady. I have cards to play. I had a podcast to record. And early bottles were made out of wood or bone, so just like very porous, not able to sterilize those things. So obviously bacteria was lethal and babies would die like very regularly from drinking out of these like substitutes. There was lots of malnutrition because the early milk substitutes like cow or goat milk was unpasteurized, which I know some people believe is the picture of health, but turns out is actually very, very bad for so many people. Unfollow. Immediate unfollows.
We can't. We're already doing breast as best we can not get into raw milk.
I can hear the trad wives scrolling past. They were into it until now.
We lost that audience.
Lost the trad wives. Sorry, guys. And then also the differing protein and fat ratios. So like casein and whey makes it very difficult. I don't know if it's casein or casein. I don't actually know. I've gone with casein. Who knows?
Couldn't
if it's
tell
wrong.
you.
I'm a social worker. I don't have expertise on these things. Made it really difficult for newborns to digest. So, like, really, they needed to be breastfeed. And then there was this kind of, like, gruel stuff called pap that was made from, like, bread, flour, oats, and boiled in various liquids that would be fed to babies on spoons. But it was kind of like the step after milk for solids, seemed to be around like 3 or 4 months, which we know now is like very, very early. But I guess if breastfeeding wasn't working out and the options for milk were not great, they were trying to progress them onto solids quite quickly. But again, was just like horrible on baby's stomach. So they were not having a great time and often would get like really bloated, and there was malnourishment, and like basically just the outcomes for babies were not good if you couldn't breastfeed. So in the early 20th century, before modern fortified formula was created, there was often advice from pediatricians to feed babies a mixture of canned evaporated milk, water, and sugar or corn syrup. So there's very obviously like a reason why breastfeeding was recommended during this time. If a baby wasn't breastfed prior to the mid-20th century, their chance of dying was like 7 to 10 times higher than that of a breastfed baby. So I'm going to say that breast was best when the other option is death.
Yes.
I agree. In that context, breast is best. No one cut that. No one circulate. No one trim. But yeah, so breastfeeding was literally a life or death choice. And wet nursing was very available, societally agreed upon, and there was kind of like a collective agreement that we make sure that as many babies are breastfed by either the person that birthed them or someone else in their community, either employed or charitably, but also babies born of low status were far likelier to die because there was only so many breastfeeding women. But then industrialization starts, women are having to work, wet nurses aren't being paid enough to remain wet nurses, and as society, we were like, well, fuck, there are still mums that can't breastfeed for whatever reason, and babies that don't want to latch for whatever reason, so we need to feed these guys, or heaps of babies are going to die, and that's not cool. And that's not a verbatim quote, obviously, but I can only assume that that was the vibe of the time.
Well, the vibe of the time was babies are dying. How do we reduce babies dying?
Yeah. They were like, oh, actually, we need mums to work. Oh, no, their babies are dying. Oh, how do we keep mum at work and not send them home, but the baby doesn't die? We can't send mum back home. She needs to work. So, in the early 19th century, a bunch of nutritionists and physicians were like, we need to start looking at this properly. And so they started finally comparing the buildup of human milk versus, it's usually cow's milk is like the most commonly agreed upon whatever. So basically this German scientist called Johann Franz Simon, which must be said in that accent specifically. And anytime that there is someone who is German, I will be saying their name like that. Big apologies to any German listeners, but shouts out to Germany. We love you guys. So Johann Franz Simon was the first person to publish a chemical analysis comparing the two types of milk. And that was in, I think, 1838, but there were a couple of different years that they gave me. And that served as the foundation for formula nutrition science for a surprisingly long time after that. Like, he did that initial study, and then everyone was like, yeah, man, that's cool. And then no one did any more study about it for a while.
Everyone was
What a
like,
shock.
looks like we have the answer. We've done one study.
We figured it out.
One man did one study about
Yeah.
women. We're sorted now.
So yeah, that served as the foundation for formula nutrition science. I wrote for quite a long time after that. So like, props to Past Abby for being really specific about that. But he basically kicked off the possibility of formula being able to exist because he could break down the difference and pinpoint like what needed to be changed in cow's milk to make it similar enough to breast milk that babies could digest it. So essentially they figured out that cow's milk has higher protein content and lower carbohydrate content than human milk, and human babies need carbs and find a lot of protein really hard to digest in those very early days. So he and other researchers also theorized that cow's milk had larger curds than human milk, which makes it indigestible for human babies, which the way everyone was talking about that was like, ha ha ha, isn't that so silly? But when I read that, I was like, huh. And then they were like, silly. And I was like, oh, okay, that's silly. What a silly. Those silly scientists. Yeah. So basically, over time, slowly and surely, they're like tinkering with milk, adding things, taking it away. In my head, it is like the start of the Powerpuff Girls. If you were a Powerpuff Girls watching, you know, it's like the guy, the
Sugar,
guy, the scientist
spice,
in his lab,
and everything
yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what they were doing, but just with formula, which is less exciting than Powerpuff Girls. So they were doing that basically until it got as close as they could get it, or closer and closer to humans' milk. And then the first ever commercial formula to be sold was called Liebig's Soluble Infant Food, developed by, ding, 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 German chemist, Justus von Liebig. Which was added to heated cow's milk. So it's like a powder that you mixed into heated cow's milk. And again, the timing of when this came out was kind of disputed, which feels like it shouldn't be because it wasn't super long ago in history. But I saw 1865 or 1869, and it was basically just a powder formula that was made from wheat flour, cow's milk, malt flour, and potassium bicarbonate, which just sounds so gross.
Yeah.
That
It doesn't
sounds
sound like it
such
would
a
taste
yuck.
good.
No. But, you know, whatever, it made cow's milk more like human milk, and it was sold for $1 per bottle, which was apparently quite expensive for the time.
Mm-hmm.
Then Nestle got involved.
I was going to say Nestle's like the first one that I remember reading about. Nestle was the big one.
Yes, and Nestle, what a shock. Pretty shit. In the way that they have over-commercialized formula. They were responsible for a lot of that over-commercialization of formula in the like 50s to 80s. But they obviously were very early in getting it on the ground, and they launched Nestle's Infant Food, which was a similar concoction. But the reason you've probably read about it is because it was the first formula that didn't need to be added to cow's milk. So it was the first formula that could be mixed with water. It was water soluble.
Yeah.
So it was the first completely artificial formula available basically worldwide, most Western countries. So over the next 20 years, different companies were like throwing their hats in the ring, and formula became widely available, but it still wasn't super popular because it was really expensive compared to cow's milk. And most parents would still opt to breastfeed just because of financial reasons. In the late 19th century, doctors were like, it's pretty weird that all these food companies are making the stuff that we give to these tiny babies at a really crucial time. Maybe we should get into developing this so it's like actually safe and nutritionally appropriate for these little humans, which you wish that someone would have perhaps thought about before all these food companies were like making money off vulnerable parents, but they got there eventually. So that's good. And this is the time that they figured out all the other stuff about like Cassian's whey, the ratios of those two things, and pasteurization, and whether there were like debates about whether pasteurization decreased nutritional value or not, blah, 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 science, until around 1883 when they figured out how to create evaporated milk. And then from there, that is basically what formula was right through till the 1960s. And then again, all through this time, they're tinkering with it to get it as close to human milk makeup as possible. And basically that tinkering is still happening today. Like there are still amazing strides being made about like what types of formula are being made, especially around lactose-free formula. That's incredible. Like so incredible. And meaning that mums don't have to like wildly change their diet if they don't want to in order to breastfeed children who have severe allergies. Yeah. So today, and this is where I needed to phone a friend, some of my colleagues, to ask like how similar they are. Formula and human milk chemically aligns in its macronutrients, so big things like the calorie structure, and things like the whey and casein ratios are exactly the same. And then manufacturers have been able to add things like taurine and lipids and omega-3 and omega-6, which is all things that human milk has that cow's milk doesn't have. So they've been able to add all of that artificially, and at the same rate that human milk has it. But we know that human milk has these amazing things, and it's such a hard word, and I'm absolutely going to fuck it up. So everyone just like hold hands and bear with me here. But it's human milk oligosaccharides, which luckily...
That was perfect pronunciation. I don't know what you're talking about.
Thank you. It was so natural, just rolled off the tongue. But everyone just calls them HMOs. So I'm just going to call them HMOs. But the variety and volume of HMOs in breast milk is just like wondrous. They're basically these complex sugars, like structures of sugars that create your baby's immune system. So modern formula has like fortified with lab created HMOs, but because of the like active nature of breast milk and a mother's system or a feeding parent system responding to the saliva in your baby through your nipple, they are like creating HMOs.
Because that's my like favorite breastfeeding fact that, again, I understand in a really rudimentary way, which is that if your baby has a cold or is getting a cold, then they will breastfeed and their saliva will tell your nipple what kind of milk to make to help them fight that infection and to build up their immunity. And so they feed, your body takes that away, processes that information, makes the HMOs, is that what you said they're called? Makes the HMOs, and then in the next feed or however much later they come out actively through there.
Yeah.
Which formula just can't replicate.
No. It's like actually magic. Like truly, you know, when people, there's like those really dumb Instagram, well, not dumb, but just like cringy Instagram accounts that are like, a woman's body, you're pure magic, babe. Like I'm always like, bleh! But the only time that I agree with it is like pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding. I'm just like.
No, that is full evidence for witchcraft. Like.
Truly.
We're witchy as fuck that we can do that. That's
breastfeeding woman should be burnt at the stake because we are witches. I just think it's like so amazing. And like HMOs, they're wondrous. They're truly miraculous, and obviously turns out like incredibly hard to manufacture because of the variety and volume and how it is. Just like they call it like an active liquid or an active, I can't remember what the like proper terminology was for it, but they're just basically it's like living and breathing. It's changing all the time and responding to your baby's needs. And then also the protein profile is just like fundamentally really different. So the protein in human milk breaks down really easily in a baby's tummy than protein in formula. And that's why some babies just like have a really tough time digesting formula. Like there are some babies who just will never agree with formula, and that's just like, they're just like not into it. Yeah, so we've kind of said it, but there's this magic element of breast milk because it's a living, adapting bodily fluid. That's the term, adapting bodily fluid. And it's unique to the body creating it and the baby receiving it. And like lots of us will have sat through antenatal classes, not Charlotte, turns out. Here's my assumption. No,
I raw dogged it.
So I've said, I'm sure we've all sat through antenatal classes, but we haven't, where we've heard about this or seen the posters at the hospital. Lord knows that every time I was fighting with the choice of switching Max onto formula, this was specifically what was running through my head. But it is very wild that the person who is like brewing the breast milk is responding to the needs of the baby getting it, and how it changes over a day or over a time, and how the output changes as a baby grows, like even whether it's like front milk or hind milk and what time during the day, and like the nutritional value changes based on how old the baby is. Like that element just can't be recreated because you would have to be creating a new formulation of formula for every feed of every day. Like,
But I think also, like, there's an argument to be had. Sorry if this is a bit of a tangent, but there's an argument to be had as well of, like, all of these things are so incredible, right? And especially the, like, front milk and the hind milk and, like, all of that kind of stuff. And again, I'm so lucky that I've never gone down a rabbit hole where I've, like, over-examined that stuff.
Yeah.
Very much. But, like, having all of this information that is good scientific information that needs to be able to be explained to us by our midwives and our care providers, and that obviously scientists need to know and doctors need to know, but it now being communicated in so many ways on platforms like Instagram and by people who are trying to teach you things for a fee means that, like, it's so complex, right? Like, you as a mum shouldn't have to actually know all of the nuances of that. And I think that that's where a lot of, like, even if you are breastfeeding, there's still this layer of pressure of like, oh, and at this time of the day, I need to use this boob and give them this milk from the front. And then later they need the hind milk, and everything needs to be perfectly timed all the time because of all of this research I've been reading about on Instagram. And it's like, no, no, like, it's really good that we know these things and that it's being researched and our care providers know about them. But it can add this other layer of just obsession over our bodies and how our bodies are functioning. And I'm in no way like, chuck your baby on your boob and it'll be fine. But in a way, I think that if breastfeeding is going fine, you can. You know what I mean? Like the advice from my mum worked out for me because the milk did just come and it was just fine. And because she was like, just go do it, it'll be fine. And then that also ended up being my reality. I never went down any of these rabbit holes and it was just fine and my babies are fine. And I think that that's so interesting too, that even you can be doing everything in quotation marks right and breastfeeding your baby exclusively, and it still turns into this minefield of guilt and obsession and fixation on like, but am I breastfeeding the exact right way all the time?
Yeah.
So that's my little tangent.
And I also think like, and I do get into this a little bit later, but like, just because we have all the information, we still need to be really careful about how we're sharing all that information, because I think there's sharing information and educating, and then there's coercing. And there's a really thin line, especially in the way that we do it in New Zealand, which we're going to get into in the next part, that I think we really walk that line of almost coercing mums into breastfeeding. Well, not coercing, but there's so much pressure that I think that it's almost impossible to say that mums are consenting to the idea of breastfeeding, which I haven't actually even specifically said, but that's how I feel, because of the information overload and the like, it's so magic that like we're overpiling that idea, and it makes it so much harder to opt out of if that's the decision that needs to be made, or the decision that someone wants to make. So that is an overview of breastfeeding, what it is and how we got formula. And as I was writing this, I was actually texting you. I was like, fuck, this is actually so boring. I don't know. I feel like this is so boring. But I found it really interesting. But I also think it's because I have a vested interest, having used formula for both my kids, like at different times in their baby years. So like maybe more interesting to me than other people. I don't know. But anyway, we're up to speed with a very brief overview. I keep needing to say it's very brief because obviously like there's so much more that we could go into, but we have a very short amount of time. But now I think we're going to pivot, talk a little bit about infant feeding in New Zealand, because as we said at the start, we have a very specific culture here. And obviously you and I both fed babies in New Zealand, and vast majority of our listeners, except for our German listeners who have also unfollowed because of my offensive.
We've lost the Germans, we've lost the trad wives.
We're going to be left with no one.
They were our core listener base.
It was 96% Germany. And rural Idaho? I don't know where the trad wives are. Someone's going to message in and be like, Idaho is a metropolis. And I'm going to be like, fuck. Anyway, before we get into the New Zealand specific stuff, we're going to hear from our sponsor.
Done Smart Mums.
All right, let's take a quick breather from the research to talk about something that makes the modern motherhood experience feel just a little bit more luxurious and affordable. We are so excited to be partnering with CF Creations for today's episode.
Yes, mums, if you are looking to completely transform a space, you have to check out their range of premium full-length mirrors. They have everything: arched, rectangular, frameless, renter-friendly styles, and an assortment of luxe colours. I actually have their massive Aldrin Alba mirror in my house, and it's 1 metre wide, 2 metres tall, has zero distortion, and it has changed my life to be able to see my whole outfit, including shoes, before heading out the door.
Which brings us to the ultimate mum test. Is it kid safe? Because CF Creations are real manufacturers who control their own production. They build these things incredibly heavy duty. Get this, the team literally dropped one of the massive mirrors on a shoot day and it didn't smash. It has a really heavy-duty frame and shadow-resistant backing, which gives me so much peace of mind with kids running around.
And because they cut out the middleman entirely, you aren't paying those insane retail markups. You get architectural level quality at direct from manufacturer family prices.
And if you're in Auckland, you have to go see them in person because their brand new official showroom is opening July 28th in Rosedale in the North Shore. It's a great excuse for a little escape, but absolutely bring the kids along. The showroom is completely family friendly.
And if you can't wait until the 28th, head over to cfcreation.co.nz right now. They've given our listeners an exclusive 10% off everything with the code DSM. Go grab yourself a stunning mirror and thank us later.
Done Smart Mums.
So we've done the history of breastfeeding and formula and how it was created, which is all important. Like, the creation of formula was like very revolutionary. That was like a very incredible thing because it meant your infant didn't just like straight up die if you didn't breastfeed or couldn't find a surrogate feeder. Like, huge, groundbreaking, incredible. And then especially and particularly like as formula has developed and gone closer to the makeup of breast milk, like that in itself is just like a technological wonder. That's incredible modern medicine. But unsurprisingly, it got quite complicated and quite stigmatized, and there have been very strong moral values assigned to the way that parents choose to feed their infants. Did you know about this?
Oh, no, I hadn't realised.
Haven't heard about it?
No. Really? Do you know what that is, though?
I know.
That is the like, sorry, I shouldn't, this is going to sound rude, but it is the like, it's the same as like the mum whose baby, you know, the mama antenatal group whose baby just like sleeps through the night.
Yeah.
And they're like, what?
That was me.
They don't sleep. It's the mum who has just managed to breastfeed, like it just hasn't, kind of me with my first, to be honest. Like, it just wasn't a thing. It was like, this is what you do. You put them on your boob and they feed, and that's great.
Yeah.
And then you look around you and you're like, other people are struggling? Other people have emotions?
Time? Yeah.
They have emotions and
I
feelings
know.
and shame? Why? Why do you have shame?
Weird. What's happened?
I think especially
It's
because
so
most
nice,
of us,
though.
and I think I can speak for the vast majority of breastfeeding mums who, like, I breastfed my daughter, and at the same time I had a friend, my like only mum friend, who was like, no, I am having this baby and I am putting them straight onto formula and that is what I'm doing. And I was like, go you. Like it didn't even enter my consciousness to be like, you sure you don't want to try? It just didn't even occur to me, even though breastfeeding was so central to me and my identity.
Yeah.
When other people in my life don't do it, it doesn't register. And so I think that there can be this element of like, what, like, are you just making up a problem that doesn't exist? The shame around breastfeeding and not breastfeeding. And you kind of have to like listen to what people are telling you to understand it. Because you can be a little bit naive to it. It's just like, oh, well, some people breastfeed and some people don't. And I personally haven't had to make that choice.
I remember feeling that way, like, because exactly the sleep option. So my children, I'm so sorry to anyone who's in the trenches right now, both my children are like unicorn sleepers and just have been. Like, that just has not been an issue. They've always been like very independent, sleep really well, high needs for sleep, so they sleep long period. Like, I'm annoying. It sucks. And we got it twice. Like, nobody gets
a miracle.
But we got it. I know. It's unbelievable.
And the fact that you're done having kids
feeding.
as well.
I know.
Like, you're also done, so it's just horribly unfair.
100% of my children slept super well and still do. But I remember someone like mentioning the idea of cry it out to me, and in my head being like, why would you ever, like, when does the child cry? Like, I just could not.
In the process of bedtime. When do they cry?
I was like, at what point are they sad about bed?
Oh, Abby, I can't. Why would your child cry at bedtime?
I was like, oh, gosh, that must be horrible. It sounds really hard. And now I've lost every listener.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've had struggles in other places, guys. Don't worry. It hasn't been the perfect parenting journey. But it totally is. It's like, if it has worked out for you, you're completely naive to what else is going on and like the pressures that are, and it's not until it's hard that society starts slamming you with ideas of what you're doing wrong.
And for me, it wasn't the breastfeeding thing. Like I had friends talk about it being like a shameful thing, and I had a lot of empathy, but it wasn't until Edie did that 10 months weaning herself, and it just about destroyed me emotionally and mentally, that I was like, oh, this is like central to my value system, and I didn't even realize.
It's really interesting seeing videos, because I've never done the like I've never had the experience of a baby weaning, like, from breastfeeding. And so for me, like, it's always been my decision to move the baby onto a bottle or whatever. And so for me, when I see videos of people, you know how there are videos that people are like, this is probably our last breastfeed, and they're crying. And I'm like, that is just so unfamiliar to me, that emotional attachment to breastfeeding. I think because it always felt tenuous for me, I never felt like settled in it. It never felt like a really mutually beneficial relationship. Like, I never felt that kind of symbiosis that people experience with a really positive breastfeeding journey. And so when I see videos like that, I'm like, oh, I've just never even like considered the emotion that must be attached. And I actually really struggle to kind of like understand what those feelings must be. I just find it really hard. Like, I understand that it must be hard, and I have so much sympathy, or like my heart goes out to people that experience that, but I really struggle to put myself in the place of that, just because I don't even know what those feelings would be. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. I remember like holding Edie to my boob when she was 10 months old, and her just fighting me and screaming at me, and me just crying and being like, I just want one more nice feed. And it was horrific. But again, you say you can't like understand that feeling, but I say that to you and you feel sad for me, you know? Like,
yeah,
I think that
I'm sad because I'm like, that wasn't what you wanted. And that's sad when something like that happens during motherhood, that you're like, this is not how I wanted this to end or how I wanted this to go, and for it to not work out, that's always like, oh.
Yeah. So I think it's just, again, all coming back to, we can all have empathy for each other even if we don't understand.
Yeah. So the thing about doing this podcast with someone who has just done their actual doctorate in motherhood
Abby may or may not have my PhD bookmarked on her computer.
is that I don't think there are going to be many topics discussed in this podcast that Charlotte doesn't already know quite a bit about already. Because
Well, I didn't know how boobs work for making milk, so
true,
you got me there.
I know. Actually, you've proved me wrong there. But I am going to be lazy because I'm going to ask you what you know about something that I know that you know about. And that is, I would love for you
Imagine if I can't explain it.
Oh my gosh, I know. Do you know, I almost text you to say, do you mind if I do this to you? But if you don't, it's fine because I know. But I know that you knew at some point. It's just whether the information's still there. But I'm going to be lazy and ask you what you know about the rise of formula feeding between like the 50s and 70s-ish. That time period kind of varies depending where you are geographically, about formula feeding and why it gained popularity when it did.
I'm going to push out of the side of my brain that desperately wants to like look so that I have all my sources, because as an academic, it's like painful to not recall sources as you're talking. And I'm just going to vibe
But we're a
it.
podcast, so we don't have to.
We don't need sources. We can say anything, actually. So sorry. The general vibe, right? So infant formula started, as you said, as like a technological advancement in medicine to feed children who otherwise could not be fed by their mother or somebody else who was able to lactate and feed them, and saved a lot of babies' lives, probably.
Yeah.
So incredible medical tool. Then companies like Nestle came along and they were like, hey, this could be a really profitable thing because capitalism.
They said, we love Milky Bars and breast milk.
Yes. They go together. I'm all giggly now.
Sorry.
And so we saw the commercialization, essentially, of infant formula. And throughout this time, ideals of motherhood shifted in that they started really directly advertising formula as better than breast milk. So that idea of the ideal mother shifted into good mothers who could afford to feed their babies this better product, could go out and purchase it and feed it to them. And then also go out and do other things like care for other children, but also kind of like perform in society. Early on, it wasn't necessarily that women were going to work, but it's that they were kind of being housewives, you know, cooking, cleaning, looking a certain way, having time and energy to do that, buying the formula, feeding that to their children. Throughout that time as well, a lot of companies really got in bed with the medical system and managed to have these kind of avenues through which hospitals also had kind of incentives to be distributing formula as well. So in a lot of cases, mothers would be giving birth, or birthing parents would be giving birth, and then nurses would be giving out samples of formula to people who had just had a baby, and really pushing this like, it's great for your baby. So,
and sometimes representatives of these companies would be at hospital wearing white coats.
Absolutely. Yeah. Telling you why this is better for your baby. And so this is the issue. This is the issue with this kind of formula pushing, is that it's being untruthful. And I think particularly formula at that time as well, like the formula that we have now again is different from like 1950s, 60s, 70s. But that all kind of culminated in, I think by the 1980s, 1990s, most babies were being formula fed. That became the social norm. There was a lot of shame around breastfeeding. You couldn't breastfeed in public, which really limited women's ability to be out in the social world. And this led to issues, because a lot of public health issues, because well-meaning parents would be in the hospital, they'd be given formula sachets, they wouldn't establish breastfeeding. They'd think, this is the best thing for my baby, I'm going to go away, I'm going to keep buying the formula. Over time, it would become apparent that they actually couldn't afford to keep up feeding their baby formula. So we started seeing things like parents would cut the number of feeds. They would mix their formula with flour to make bottles go further. And they would also mix them with other things like cow's milk or introduce solids too early because they couldn't afford to keep formula feeding their babies, which obviously
often
led
they would not do the ratios correctly, like make the like higher water
really
ratios,
watered
and
down.
so babies would be really malnourished because they weren't
Yes.
getting.
Yeah. So we started seeing a lot of issues, obviously, with the health of children and malnourishment and infant deaths and things like that. And obviously these parents couldn't just easily reestablish breastfeeding 3 months down the track when they realized they couldn't afford to keep using formula. So it resulted in a really difficult public health context. I think specifically for our Māori, Pacifica and lower income communities, it had really devastating consequences. And again, these are already communities who are really trying to perform good parenthood because of the way society already views these people as parents, and the racism and stigma that goes into parenting. So all of that happened and culminated in the World Health Organization rejigging the guidelines. I don't know if you want me to keep talking about that or if you wanna...
Stop talking.
Yes,
You're
okay.
going too far.
Yeah, okay, cool. So that is formula and how it kind of became the dominant model over breastfeeding, and that led to a whole lot of issues.
Yeah. So basically, in the 50s, it was assumed that mothers wouldn't breastfeed. Like the way that now it is assumed mothers will breastfeed, it was opposite. It was assumed that you would formula feed because mums were told through this over-commercialization of formula that formula was better for babies than breast milk. And also breastfeeding was seen as like very primitive and gross. And it was this like technology boom that was happening. And if you were breastfeeding, you were like not very modern and you're like not up with this, like we're beyond that now, we're past that. And lots of the like qualitative studies that I saw around like attitudes of breastfeeding at the time, it was very like, well, my neighbor breastfed and I just couldn't believe she would do that in public. Like it was really shaming, like mothers saying this about other mothers. Oh, I saw my neighbor breastfeeding and it was just disgusting. Or I was horrified. I was so embarrassed to find out my friend was breastfeeding her baby. Like really, really shaming, embarrassed language. It was just seen as like incredibly primitive and very backwards. And so there was this big rise. So, Charlotte, I've sent you some things. There is something, the first thing I sent you, can you click into it and describe what you see to the people?
I see an ad, and it is like a mother dressed in soft buttery yellow, and her baby is also dressed in soft buttery yellow, and she is holding her like above her head in a very cute like position, gazing up at her lovingly. And it said, what does it say? Contented his doctor recommended carnation, which is obviously a formula brand.
Yeah.
And it says 8 out of 10 mothers who feed their babies a carnation formula say, my doctor recommended it.
And then it says something like, and no wonder, for carnation is safer, more nourishing and more digestible than any other form of milk for baby's bottle. Yet this
proper milk for infant feeding costs far less than prepared formulas.
Prepared formula.
Yeah.
Ask your doctor about carnation.
About carnation.
It's the milk every doctor knows. So we'll post this on Instagram so you can see it. But this is the kind of like chat that was going on. These were very common. Carnation was a very famous brand. And like it says, his doctor recommended carnation. Like this was how do you not start to formula feed when this is like what is going on? And
doctors are recommending it.
Exactly. And 8 out of 10 doctors are recommending carnation. So in the US, lots of the data that I've got is US based because New Zealand was like a bit slow on the uptake of documenting things like breastfeeding rates. But so it's US, but we know that we track similarly. But anyway, so it showed that in 1972, breastfeeding rates for infants became as low as 22% breastfed, which like is so wild to think about.
Yeah,
Like,
that is crazy.
It's especially like for us where we're situated in the time now that we are parents. That is so insane. So New Zealand has always had like a little bit more of a hippie culture. So we didn't quite get that low. Like we have always tended to lend a little bit more naturalist than other countries. We probably didn't lean into that like modernism quite as much as America and the UK did. I couldn't find a specific statistic that was comparable around the time, but we have always mirrored in those trends in terms of where we have plummeted and then where we have started to regrow as well. Then there was a bit of a tidal wave where second wave feminism and pushing back against post-World War II gender norms and body liberation and a bit of the like peace and love hippie movement of the 70s kind of all combined. And we started to see a big shift in the approach to parenthood in general, more specifically in the approach to motherhood as a whole, which quite strongly affected childbirth and infant feeding, although feminism, and I actually read this in Charlotte's PhD, so she might be able to speak to this a little bit better than me. There is a lot of conversation around feminists actively ignoring like the labor of breastfeeding, and that is like a very unspoken issue in a lot of like feminist theory and feminist movements, which is really interesting. But definitely you can talk about it though, because you
generally, like in my thesis, the way I kind of frame it in my work is that I use something called matricentric feminism, which is a feminism for mothers, which was developed in 2019 by Andrea O'Reilly, who was one of my PhD examiners, which was terrifying.
Stop!
I know. And that's my little brag. She examined my thesis. She liked it. And then, so what it argues is that a lot of the feminist debate has either kind of ignored motherhood, or it has just framed motherhood and mothering and everything that goes into it, like breastfeeding, like gestational labor and giving birth, as like oppressive, like they are inherently oppressive. And so therefore the way to overcome it is just don't do it anymore.
Not to do it.
Rather than actually exploring like how might we allow women to do this labor and carry out mothering if that's something that they want to do and choose to do, and support it from a feminist perspective. So that's what matricentric feminism tries to do.
Yeah. And so I say that feminism pushed back a lot on some of these ideas because they very much did. But I'm not going to say that feminism came in and was like, we're going to save mothers and we're going to fix everything, because that just like actually is not what has happened, because as we know, like motherhood and everything that comes with it has actually been ignored in a lot of feminist spaces. But in this like kind of second wave feminism movement and like all of those combinations of things that I mentioned before, there was a lot more conversation around advocacy, primarily of not having such heavily medicated births, because this was the time of like twilight births and just like knocking mums out and like the mums having stuff done to them that they just didn't even consent to. Like consent wasn't even really a discussion. So there was a lot more of discussion around medical decisions that were made rather than being made on behalf of mum. There was that outcry that, what a shock, these should perhaps happen in conversation with the woman and with the consent of a woman before you like do whatever you want to do because you are a man in a white lab coat. So initially that conversation happens around childbirth, and that is where we started to see the phrases natural birth and, in quotes, medicated birth or unnatural or whatever. Like that's where we started to see that kind of dichotomy. So we saw that through that time. And then alongside that, everyone was like, oh, hang on, if we're making these moves back to natural childbirth, surely we have a look at, in quotation marks, natural ways of feeding our infants too. So I have another picture for you. I've sent you, it's a book cover and a table of contents. If you could just let us know what you see here.
So it is Doctors Penny and Andrew Stanway, Breast is Best. And my image isn't big enough to read the subtitle, but it's a mum.
I don't think you need to read the subtitle.
It's a mum gazing down very lovingly, maybe like 1970s, 80s style
Yes.
hair. And she is holding her baby and breastfeeding her baby on the cover.
And looking more glamorous than I have ever looked at any time breastfeeding my children.
Blowout is amazing.
Amazing.
And so the Breast is Best book, the table of contents is how breastfeeding works, preparation and pregnancy, the early days, your milk supply, some common problems, mainly for fathers, breastfeeding and sex, and common questions and answers.
And so then it also says, in a quotation mark, the best food for every newborn infant is breast milk. And Breast is Best will help give your baby the best possible start for a happy, healthy life. American baby books for your baby's future. So, here is where we see the phrase that traumatized generations of mothers. Breast is Best was
Breast
coined
is
by
best.
doctors Penny and Andrew Stanley in their book
Oh.
1978.
So that's the original
is-
source.
This is the book. There was like maybe people had started saying it colloquially, maybe it became a bit of a phrase, but like they were the people who cemented Breast is Best in this book. It seems like they coined the phrase, then they wrote the book when they saw it was gaining traction. That kind of like cemented everything. And then it got used as a public health campaign, like in conjunction with them. They like helped this public health campaign in America. And then it was just like everywhere. Like it was just one of those things. Like in New Zealand, we have like Make It Click. Like there are just things in advertising that just take off for whatever reason. And Breast is Best was one of those ones that have just like stuck in cultural memory, ingrained in society. And so from there, breastfeeding rates rose. And then they kind of began to fall again in the turn of the century, which you spoke a little bit about. And then that kind of like leads to quite recently for us. Like, this is our lifetime. We're talking about like after our births. And so I said, we're going to make this New Zealand focused, and we are. So there's this really great thesis by this really cool girl called Charlotte Kells Robertson that has an amazing chapter on infant feeding. And it talks about the specific pressure that New Zealand mothers felt breastfeeding. And it was like, just on a personal note, so affirming to read that chapter as someone who didn't have an easy time breastfeeding, like felt
gonna make
all
me
of those
cry.
things. I know, I almost messaged you to be like, I think I'm going to cry talking to you about this, but like having been in that position and feeling all those feelings and seeing it written in like legitimate research, and then someone saying like, this is an issue and mothers shouldn't feel like this, instead of like, these mothers were just people who couldn't figure it out, or they were being hysterical, or like that's not legit, like they should have just figured it out, was so incredible to read. And it made me so excited for like mothers to come, knowing that this is the research that's being done now, that hopefully we're able to shift that because we've got this research that's now going to inform these issues that we're having, and looking at it on like both this huge macro level of like, how is this being affected systemically? How is this being impacted in our health? But then also right down to these tiny like individual micro stories of like, this is how A, B, and C mum felt about this, was just really lovely. But anyway, I could sit here and talk to you about your own PhD to you. I could recite it back to you. I think you'd vomit if I did that. But I would love for you to give our listeners like a very brief overview, which you kind of have already done at the start, but maybe this is where you could like lead into what you did want to talk about when you asked me if you wanted to stop, about what you touch on in the infant feeding chapter, and like particularly the discussion of the pressures that is placed on Kiwi mama and what they feel to breastfeed.
So from memory, I'll say as well, this is the chapter that me and my supervisor like disagreed about the most, and she kept being like, you need to make this better, like your argument's not strong enough. So it's still like hard for me to even like conceptualize where I landed sometimes. But essentially there's two things happening, because one of the disagreements that me and my supervisor kept having was like, you make it sound like a mother goes into the hospital and she is aggressively told by care providers that she has to breastfeed, and I don't agree with that. I don't think the control is that overt and that specific. Like there is nothing saying, if you don't breastfeed your baby, we will remove your baby. If you don't breastfeed your baby, you will go to prison. Like there's no punishments happening really in the medical system. So how else are you going to conceptualize that, and how are you going to make your point better? And so where it kind of came to was this amalgamation of medical pressure, public health policy pressure, and that's the very like breast is best. You have to sign a consent form if you want to give your baby some formula. But in theory, you could push through all of that, right? And then go off into your community, into your bubble, and nobody blink twice that you are bottle feeding your baby. And that doesn't happen. So it's not just that public health policy pressure, it is also cultural pressure and ideals of normative motherhood and what a good ideal mother would do. And I think both of those are happening at the same time. So in New Zealand, we adopted the, in the 90s, I think, the World Health Organization put out directives to address the issues that were coming out of the commodification of infant formula and this huge decline in breastfeeding rates. And New Zealand has adopted those guidelines. And those guidelines can seem quite specific and quite rigid, and that is what we have in New Zealand hospitals. So if you have a midwife or an antenatal provider or a hospital staff member who will not tell you how to bottle feed, it is because within those guidelines is the agreement that no medical professional will endorse bottle feeding. And so it's easier to just not touch it with a 10-foot pole than to potentially be seen as endorsing formula feeding. So that's obviously
and I guess just
an
to
issue.
contextualize how far-reaching those guidelines are, I, as a social worker who is never a health professional, I am never giving health advice, I had to do training around these guidelines. So even it is so outside my scope, I would never be talking to someone about breastfeeding or like in any other way other than if you want to breastfeed, great. If you want to formula feed, great. I had to sit down and do a training and like sign basically a form saying that I would like adhere to the policy that we have.
Yeah. And so I think the thing that I find hard to balance here, right, is that adopting those guidelines was incredibly successful in New Zealand and has done an incredible amount of good for families and babies and reestablishing breastfeeding as something that is accepted culturally. It's a full 180, which is incredibly hard to do. And I am very proud that we live in a country where, you walk into your local farmer's department store, if you are like me, and there's little signs everywhere in the furniture section saying, like, sit down and breastfeed your baby if you want to. And that is a good thing. These guidelines were a good thing, and at the time they had to be incredibly rigid because it was such a 180 we were trying to accomplish. So I want to hold that nuance there. What I will say is the thing that is often missed from the guidelines is that they also specifically state, and the World Health Organization continues to specifically state, that in the event that a mother cannot breastfeed, and they include things like mental distress and things like that as valid reasons for not breastfeeding your baby, formula is a fantastic second option. Like, it is the next best thing. And I think that they potentially even in some places word it that way, that it is the next best thing. So that is where the really strong public health policy push has come from. But now we're in a place where that is now like amalgamating with cultural pressure and perhaps the guidelines. People look at that like it's a slippery slope if we loosen those at all, and we don't want to get back to where we were. But if you think about the other pressures that mothers are now under in terms of workloads and isolation and having to go back into the workforce, as well as just how difficult it can be to breastfeed, it doesn't really line up with the reality of how people live their lives anymore, which is really difficult. there's that. And then there's also the cultural pressure, which is obviously that we've adhered to those guidelines so well that now we kind of see the ideal mother as the natural mother who breastfeeds. And we know, the benefits of breast milk. And it's like, well, why would you not give your baby the best? If breast is best, you need to give them the best or else you are bad.
Yeah.
And then the other thing with the cultural construction as well is Foucault's theory of biopower, which is, I'm going to explain this so badly, but essentially that governments and institutions don't punish us in like a traditional way anymore of like, you're going to go to prison if you don't breastfeed your baby. I'm going to punish you. But instead use things like public health policy to kind of train our bodies into being docile. And that in turn means that so say, for example, public health campaigns, like you get vaccinated, you breastfeed your baby, you try to keep your weight low, all of those things are fed to us as the best thing to do. So we do them automatically without being told to and without being physically punished. And then that therefore benefits the state because we're looking after ourselves and the state doesn't have to spend extra money on medical costs and things like that. And so I kind of conceptualize breastfeeding within this idea of biopower as well, where all of that weight has been put onto mothers' shoulders to ensure the best health outcome for them and their babies by breastfeeding. But we haven't followed that up with the social supports that also need to be there.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So there's a PDF that I have sent you, which now we've talked about it, is the BFHI, which is, I have it here.
The Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative? Is that what it stands for?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And this is the policy that was adopted, I believe, in 1999. I can't believe I didn't write it down, but I believe in 1999, this was the policy that was adopted from WHO guidelines. Health New Zealand adopted it. It is still in place today. Would you like to tell us about the BFHI and the steps that it recommends here? What do you see? What's this PDF showing you?
So it's a beautiful, colourful chart, and it's titled The 10 Steps to Successful Breastfeeding. And it has the 10 steps with like nice little colourful cubes and nice little illustrations. So
Pastels.
It's very pretty. Also, they've tried to incorporate like a diverse range of people.
Yep. We've got people of many cultures.
Cultures.
It's all just very beautiful and successful.
Everyone's welcome here. Okay, so we've got one, hospital
Unless
policies.
you're feeding your baby formula.
And then you are not welcome. So number 1, hospital policies. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by not promoting infant formulas, bottles or teats, making breastfeeding care standard practice, keeping track of support for breastfeeding. Number 2 is staff competency. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by training staff on supporting mothers to breastfeed and assessing health workers' knowledge and skills. Number 3 is antenatal care. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by discussing the importance of breastfeeding for babies and mothers, preparing women for how to feed their baby. Number 4 is care right after birth. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by encouraging skin-to-skin contact between mother and baby soon after birth, helping mothers to put their baby to the breast right away. Number 5 is supporting mothers with breastfeeding. Support mothers with breastfeeding. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by checking positioning, attachment, and suckling, giving practical breastfeeding support, helping mothers with common breastfeeding problems. Number 6 is supplementing. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by giving only breast milk unless there are medical reasons, prioritising donor human milk when a supplement is needed, helping mothers who want to formula feed to do so safely. That's interesting.
I know. And something that I didn't know working in a hospital.
Yeah.
I didn't know that that was part of the BFHI, and I've supposedly been trained in the BFHI. So definitely flag for later.
Also missed that. Like in my, I don't remember coming across that in my thesis when I was studying the BH.
Wow, what does
I've
it
forgotten
feel
the
like to be
acronym.
the dumb mum of dumb smart mums?
God, I'm the stupidest.
Oh. It is
Number
a side
7.
note, hilarious how many people think that that's why we named the podcast what we named it, that there's one dumb mum and one smart mum.
I know, and I'm like, no, we're both dumb
we're
sometimes.
both the
We're
dumb
both
smart mums.
sometimes.
Anyway, moving on.
Everyone's like, who is it? Who's the dumb one?
Who's the dumb one? I'm like,
All right.
well, she's got her doctorate, so...
Shut up, Andy. All right. Number 7, rooming in. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by letting mothers and babies stay together day and night. Flag that for my experience. Making sure that mothers of sick babies can stay near their baby. Flag that for other people's experiences that I've heard of.
Yep.
Number 8, responsive feeding. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by helping mothers know when their baby is hungry, not limiting breastfeeding times. Not all lactation experts. The lactation industry has something to account for there, I think. Number 9, bottles, teats and pacifiers. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by counsel mothers on the use and risks of feeding bottles, teats and pacifiers. And number 10, discharge. Hospitals support mothers to breastfeed by referring mothers to community resources for breastfeeding support, working with communities to improve breastfeeding support services. And it is from the World Health Organization and UNICEF.
Yes, and I thought I had the date that this was, but I can't find it, but I'll put it on the show notes. But it was the most recent copy of the flyer that I could find. It was the most up-to-date one. So what do you think of the BFHI? What are your thoughts?
Would struggle to see how this would be implemented in our current hospital system with the current staffing levels and resources available to people working there. Feels pretty unrealistic.
Yep. And it's very much like the things that get lost are the things that in this policy is saying this is the support required for this, and the support is the first thing to go. So we're managing to say the words and get the education across because that's quick and easy to do, and it's quick and easy to tell someone don't use a pacifier, do breastfeed, and then walk out of the room. But the extra stuff, and especially when we look at discharge, like community support services for breastfeeding, other than La Leche League, which they're a charity or an organisation that's been run by volunteers, there's not a lot out there.
And a lot of people are having to pay for lactation consultants.
Yeah.
And then again with this... and no, you go.
I was just going to say, like, they could go to Plunkett, but obviously that's where people feel incredibly judged, and we also know that Plunkett has an issue with outdated knowledge.
Yeah. And I think that's also as well in there, like a lot of the community support, again, has become Instagram, which when I said not all lactation consultants, the lactation consultants I follow on Instagram are fantastic lactation consultants who attempt to do all of this and are incredible. But you can't deny that there is an industry that has sprung up around pay me a $250 fee and I will tell you to only feed your baby for 10 minutes, do all this weird stuff that is actually not actually what we should be doing and can cause further problems. And I just think also, like, in an ideal world as well, all of this is, yes, when you are in the hospital in, you know, a beautifully funded, perfectly staffed hospital, and you get to stay there for 48 hours, apparently, now 3 days, according to the government. You know, even if all of that was working correctly, we still step outside the hospital and all of that support, you know, that's the first 3 days of you having your baby, which is helpful and invaluable, but doesn't account for the mum who's like, okay, and in 3 months I have to go back to work because I can't take the pay cut while I'm on maternity leave, or I have other children who need me, I have sick parents, I have no social support around me. All of that falls away pretty quick.
Yeah. So it's really great for hospitals to have this great policy, but if the policy isn't continuing on throughout the rest of the mother's life or the feeding journey, like the World Health Organization recommendation is that an infant is fed for 2 years. So like if we're thinking about, okay, we'll take on WHO recommendation, why is it only that our policy has extended to the first 3 days? Or if you want to be really generous about it, because they're talking about antenatal care and postnatal care, maybe the first 6 weeks if we're thinking about LMC care. But even that is not enough. And that's only individual health professional interaction. That's not like wider level policy change to support breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So BFHI, it worked. It made breastfeeding rates absolutely skyrocket in New Zealand. Like our rates for breastfeeding comparative to other countries are really phenomenal. And like you say, we have like quite an incredible culture of being very accepting of breastfeeding, having spaces for breastfeeding. We've got allowances for breastfeeding more so than other countries. I'm not saying we're like incredible because there is still so much work to be done. But comparative to other countries, we are generally quite accepting of breastfeeding and encouraging of breastfeeding. So you'd look at it and think that we've got these like amazing systems and support for mothers. And this is where I want to say that individual workers who support birthing people can be so incredible at supporting a breastfeeding journey. And this is what you talk a lot about in your journey, in your thesis, not your journey. Well, your thesis was a journey, but in your thesis is that because we've made breastfeeding the expectation, because we've said it's best, and hospitals have adopted that policy, it means that we've cemented breastfeeding as synonymous with being a good mother. And so while individually no one is ever going to tell you like, oh, you're a bad mum because you formula fed, there's this cultural synonym of breastfeeding equals good, formula fed equals failure. And so like I was thinking as I was reflecting and talking to colleagues about this, even in the phrasing of failure to breastfeed or successfully breastfed, which like I know that's not the best way to phrase it, but it's our vernacular and how we quickly explain infant feeding to someone. So like if a doctor asked me like, did you breastfeed your children? I would say I didn't manage to successfully breastfeed with either of my kids. And if someone said that to me, I'd be like, well, that's so fucked. Like, don't say that about yourself. But it's just the easiest way for me to communicate the journey that I had in feeding my children. And I think because we know that like breastfeeding has so many incredible benefits, like the immunity, the nutritional needs, the microbiome, blah, blah, blah. And then there's also all these positives that we hear about from others, like decreased risk of certain cancers and lower risk of PND and less chance of osteoporosis and like all these other things. And then also sometimes people tell you it'll help you lose weight, which is like such a fucked up thing to say.
Not
like
people, the medical system too. There are current health pamphlets that are handed to mothers after they have a baby and say if you breastfeed, you'll lose weight faster, which is not true. You know what helps you lose weight? What helps you lose weight after a baby? Raging postpartum depression, baby.
Yeah. When you have to stop eating because you're so traumatized. Oh my gosh. Unreal. But yeah, so there's like, you know, there's like all these incredible benefits, but there is so much pressure now on mums to just like shut up and make it work, to just like sacrifice everything in order to breastfeed because it's what is best. And so if you try and stop or make the choice not to, there's this unspoken like, so you're just choosing to not do what's best for your baby then. Like that is the unspoken thing, right? And so you have a very clearly made, commonly agreed wrong choice from the outset. And you'd think that we would get over that guilt, but as evidenced by myself this week when my 18-month-old got terrible hand, foot, and mouth, I immediately went back to feeling guilty that I should have like tried to make breastfeeding work, even though I know it would have been a terrible decision because it would have been so detrimental to my mental health.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to bring that up. And I can also say that I've told Abby this week, but when she texted me and was like, I'm terrible because I didn't breastfeed her and that's why she's so sick with hand, foot and mouth. And I was like, my baby, who was breastfed until she was 2, got horrific hand, foot and mouth at the same age, like raging, terrible, weeks-long process. And breastfeeding didn't save her from that. So,
yes. But it's so impossible to engage in this space without them being like, here are all the incredible things that this can do for your baby. And so when you don't breastfeed, you are stuck with that idea of like, I didn't give my baby that. My baby missed out on this thing because I couldn't do this thing. And so, like, as you say in your thesis as well, like, breastfeeding has become interlinked with maternal identity, which you spoke about in our last episode, that was, like, your secretly smug thing. And so, like, on the other side of the coin for me, I think I'm always going to hold guilt or shame around the idea that I had, like, all of the privilege, all of the support, all of the education, all of the access, and I still didn't manage to breastfeed either of my children past the age of, like, 4 months.
And I think also there's, like, something happening here as well, which I want to talk about in our next episode, so I won't get too far into it. But this idea of, we so often have these competing camps. I'm going to be talking about a different competing camp next episode. That neither of those camps actually exist to serve women. So when formula was the ideal, that was so that we could have the ladies doing all the other things we expected them to be doing socially at the time. Like, that benefited patriarchy, that they weren't breastfeeding their babies. And it was this intense pressure to be the ideal through formula feeding your baby and doing all of these other things. And now we've done the full 180, which, as I said, has had significant health benefits. I'm not saying we shouldn't have done that, but now we've gotten to this other kind of pinnacle of that, where again we are saying that this is the best, this is the ideal, and we need you to do this and do everything else that you need to do and manage your mental health and your health and your weight and all of the things that mothers are expected to do. And it's just impossible for lots of people. And instead we have, like, breast is best versus formula's fine, and, nobody should bat an eyelid at formula. And I don't think either of those really serve mothers. And instead we need, like, a woman-centered or parent-centered model that gives you all of the information. Like, we should be giving that information in hospitals in a non-judgmental way. But when a new mother says, like, yep, I have understood the benefits, I completely, like, accept and agree with all of that. On balance, for me and my family, formula is going to be best. That is, you've given me the information, we've discussed it, and now I would like to make this choice. We need to be okay with the choice that is made. And that's what actually, like, we call it, not to be too gendered, but we do call it women-centered care or mother-centered care, where it's your job as a care provider to provide the information, and it is the mother's job to make a choice.
Yeah. And the response to that needs to be non-judgmental. Yeah,
which I don't know how to, and then we come back to this situation where I'm like, and I don't know how to fix that culturally.
No,
I don't know.
And this is, and I think that's kind of like the beauty of this, is that, like, we're not saying, I'm never going to sit here and be like, and here's what we should do, because I'm not the expert in this space.
Yeah, and you're not
But
saying
I think
we shouldn't endorse any of the pushback against formula, or that the baby-friendly hospital initiative is bad. It's just what happens when that doesn't work, because sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like I said earlier, there's all this emphasis around breastfeeding and getting women to breastfeed for longer and educating women around breastfeeding, and then this lack of support is stark. So, like I said, the WHO recommendation is that a child is breastfed until 24 months. And I've written down here, Charlotte, what issues can you see that may prevent a mum from being able to breastfeed a child until they're 24 months?
Work.
What? No way. Oh my gosh.
Work, and also like bodily autonomy.
Which I have to say, in this preparation for this episode, in this research, bodily autonomy was just not mentioned.
No.
Like, it has just not been considered. It is not a factor in any of the discussion right now. Maybe it is now. Maybe there's, like, burgeoning research, and, like, I'm sure there is. I'm hoping that there is. But in all of the history and all of the conversation around, like, when formula got popular and when breastfeeding and all this stuff, like, autonomy is just not spoken about. It's like there is just no consideration to the amount of, like, self-sacrifice that is involved in breastfeeding, but also in like making a choice for your baby. Like there's it just like it really blew my mind that it was just like just not even a consideration
Mm.
in any of this like research or in the history or anything like that.
But when has like women's bodily autonomy been central to research, like ever?
Exactly. But I think maybe I was naive to the fact that it would be here because it is a bodily process happening to a woman. And so I was like, surely there's going to be consideration that there's going to be like personal preference around, like even for me, like the feeling of lactation, like, you know, there's so many things that come with lactation that can be really difficult. But I just thought because it is such a like physical bodily process, I expected there to be more consideration of just like preference of sensation even, but there was just no conversation around that at
Yeah,
all.
and one of the participants in my research as well talked about this, and she put it so beautifully, but she decided to stop breastfeeding after 6 or 8 weeks, I think. And she was talking about how she just needed her body back, that she'd had this really hard pregnancy, this really hard birth. She didn't like being pregnant. She thought that when he was born, she would feel like herself again, and she didn't. And she just needed to be able to have some things for herself. And sometimes that was like a vape. She was like, I need to just be able to go and sit outside and have a vape and know that I'm not harming my baby and just actually have something for me. And I know that's not good for me. And I know that, like, you know, all of these things, but like I just need this little moment of time that is mine, that I'm not just always thinking about him and thinking about everything that's going into my body. And I want to drink as much coffee as I want to in the day. And I want to have a whole lot of Coke and just like, just not Coke like the drink.
I was like, do we need to clarify that? Just not a bunch of Coke and then go back and parent.
And it was really beautiful. And as she talked about as well, like she talked to me when she had just done it. I think it was her second interview, and she was like, I'm so scared to tell my midwife and I'm so scared to tell my mum. And I haven't told them yet, and I don't know what I'm going to do next time I see them. And then when I saw her next, I asked her how she went, and she was like, it was fine. They were really supportive and they completely understood, and it's not an issue. But it was so built up for her as this like defining moment where everybody was going to turn on her and judge her.
Yeah, 100%. And that was actually one of my favorite parts in that chapter because I felt very similarly, especially after my second. I'd had a very tough pregnancy, a very tough birth, and then she was a big girl and very hungry. And I was just like, I just need to know that I am not the only person that is keeping this child alive. Like, that is mucking with my head so much. I'm so depleted that if there isn't another source of nutrition, I think I'm going to lose my mind. Like, I just can't cope with that idea. And also with my first and my second, I just don't like the sensation of breastfeeding. Letdowns really hurt. I get really anxious during a letdown. Like, it just never agreed with me in a way that it seems to with other people. And like, that is just a huge part of why I made that choice for myself. But I just feel like those stories aren't there. Like, it's just not seen as a valid enough reason to stop breastfeeding or stop trying.
I think it's very similar to like discussions around abortion in a way, in terms of like when we talk about bodily autonomy and abortion, we are always given the most extreme examples of like something horrific happened to this 15-year-old and now she's going to have to carry a baby if she can't access, you know, reproductive health care. Or, you know, your baby has a awful medical condition and you need to terminate that pregnancy, and if you don't, then bad, you know, it'll escalate and you could die. And like, we're always given the most extreme examples to justify it being an okay choice to make, when, you know, there's other reasons that we can just choose to exercise bodily autonomy. And I think the same goes for feeding. We hear like, I just had no milk, or I had a horrific birth and I was in ICU and so I couldn't breastfeed my baby and so I shouldn't be made to feel ashamed of that. And it's like, yes, obviously yes.
Yeah.
But also you should be able to be like my friend who's just like, I know that that is going to be incredibly difficult for me and it is not going to work for me, or I just
Yeah.
know part of me wants to do that, and so I know it's not going
Yeah.
to be good for me to try do it, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, and I also would love to get to the place where we can do it without having to justify it, even without having to say, I know that's not going to be good for me. Like, I just don't think you need to disclose what your personal
Exactly.
threshold or personal capacity is. I would just love to be able to get to a place where you're like, I'm going to formula feed. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's it. And there's no further discussion. There's no further justification. There's no further interrogation. Like, there's just nothing more required. And I think, like, I'm always going to be open with my story because I want other mothers to feel seen by it. But I would love to get to a place where I don't feel the need to justify to the medical professionals that I speak to. That would be amazing.
Yeah. It's really interesting that, because do you feel like you have to justify it to medical professionals? Yeah. Because that's really interesting because some people that I've talked to are like, I thought I would have to and then I actually didn't and it was actually all fine. And I think there's two things happening there. Like some medical professionals are like that, unfortunately, and that must be awful to deal with and must impact the way you interact with care providers going forward. But also that, like, there's something really, and I think this is what I was trying to articulate in my thesis that's really difficult to articulate, is it's so ingrained now that even when you have supportive care providers, supportive family, everybody around you is like, yeah, formula feed. I think most mothers would still be having this internal battle of, have I done something
100%.
terrible to my baby? And like, where it's so hard to pinpoint where that is coming from and why it's so pervasive.
And I think that you're talking about there, I think that is the New Zealand aspect of it. Like, it really just seems like, and I think even in your thesis, someone was talking about like a sister in Ireland who like doesn't have that experience. You know, it's like really, we seem to have that so pervasively ingrained in the motherhood identity, what motherhood is in New Zealand, that doesn't seem to exist as overtly or as like, I don't, it just feels like it's this like mist or something that's like sitting, it's just like it's in motherhood. It's like they cannot be separated. And at the start of your chapter, I'm sorry, I'm like just like really fangirling about your thesis to you right now, but you talked about how it was like, it wasn't even like there was ever a discussion about you breastfeeding. Like, it was just always understood. It was not even a consideration. It was just like, you will breastfeed. No one ever like...
I didn't make the decision. Nobody sat me down and was like, do you want to breastfeed your baby?
No. And that was the same for me. I don't feel like I opted into it. I was just in it. And so then when I had to go through the process of opting out of it, it felt really like, oh my gosh, am I even allowed to? Like, and by the time I'd had my second, like, I was much more confident and I knew that was something I was allowed to do, but I still really struggled. Yeah, I just think it's so interesting, the New Zealand element of it. And we've gotten like a slightly off track. We're coming back a little bit to like the World Health Organization being recommendation for 2-year-olds, just because there's this really great quote, and then we can carry on. But I have sent you a quote to read out that I just loved.
The quote is, efforts to increase breastfeeding that solely focus on individually based behaviour change without addressing the economic and social realities women face and the difficult trade-offs they are forced to make in the months following the birth of their child risk alienating and stigmatising the very women they hope to help.
Which I basically just thought summed everything up. Like,
Really
we have this expectation of breastfeeding for mothers that has been incorporated into all aspects of healthcare and maternity care. It's baked into our systems, into our culture, into cultural expectations, without like any of the actual change or support required to enact the labour that breastfeeding demands, particularly if the aim is to support breastfeeding until a child is 24 months. Like, if we're thinking about cultures where breastfeeding is established really successfully, it's often those collectivist cultures, or cultures that have like periods of confinement where all the breastfeeding parent has to do is like sit in bed and feed their baby. There's no expectation to cook or clean or launder or work or care for other children. I was actually talking to a lactation consultant at work, and she was talking about how in confinement periods like this, often the mother is never alone. Like, there's always a support person there to assist, or like emotionally like sit and be there with her. Often it's a peer, often it's an elder. It's not a professional, it's someone who's like on a level with her. But in New Zealand, like, we're thinking about, we'll come home from the hospital, and if we're lucky, our partners are home for 2 weeks, and then our partner goes back to work, and then fuck, who's going to pick the older kid up from ECE, and can I time that with breastfeeding? And I need to get that pile of laundry done, but I'm not going to have time to rest, but I do need to breastfeed, and he's going to wake up soon. And then if your baby's screaming and it's impacting your mental health, they're like, oh, just breastfeed. But if you've got like this confinement period and you've always got someone with you, like they can be like, hey, I'll take the baby and we'll go for a walk and you can have some rest and we'll come back and we'll try breastfeeding again later when everyone's feeling a bit happier. Like that just doesn't exist in this very like little individualistic society that we have that's like completely unsupported. And then also like in this space where you're like in this sort of collectivist village culture, there is someone to sit there and be there with you when things are hard. Like I think about, imagine if you had someone sitting there with you who'd been through cluster feeding when you're cluster feeding, and they're like, oh fuck, I've been here too, and like I tried this, it might not work, but like, you know, it's like anecdotal. It's not a professional coming in and being like, well, your latch is wrong and you're holding their head like a rugby ball, and like, you know, like all this really confusing chat that you just like actually just don't need when like shit's hitting the fan.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously that inherent like power imbalance between professionals that is removed from something like that. With that like cultural pressure that we feel to breastfeed, it can make it very hard to be honest about when you're struggling with it. And this is something a lot of the mums in your PhD spoke with you about, like feeling like they were being tested by health professionals, or like feeling like it was a test when their LMC came to visit and watched a feed, or like feeling like they were tested like in the hospital ward. And I felt like that with my oldest, with Freddie. Like I was saying this to the lactation consultant at work, that I like did it was also lockdown, so on Zoom, a Zoom lactation consultant course that the hospital put on for free before I had Freddie. And it was just like, I'm sure she was lovely. I've never met her again. Like, I just got so frazzled by it and felt so frantic and so confused and so stressed that I got off the call and just sobbed that I wasn't going to be able to do it. Like I already was setting myself up for failure. I was constantly nervous about feeling like I was doing it wrong or getting it wrong. And Freddie was small, so everyone was worried about how much weight he was putting on, and I felt that stress so much. I was so panicked about not getting enough milk, which now looking back, I was fine with milk. I also just like hated the feeling of breastfeeding. I was undiagnosed ADHD at the time, and now I look back, I'm like, holy moly, that was so overstimulating. Like that is just like your brain was not coping with how overstimulating that was. And nobody had ever warned me that I might just not like the feeling of breastfeeding. Like I had always just assumed that I would like feel all that magic and it was so good for the baby and it was going to be so good for me, and I was just going to like pop him on my boob and it was going to be great. And I felt so much guilt that I didn't love breastfeeding the way that I'd heard other people talk about loving breastfeeding. Like I was like, am I just not a natural mother? And I think that is like, yeah, I don't know. Like I really struggled.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, I have a similar thing, but slightly different, where like I've noticed in medical professional settings, I don't know if it's like I have a really low pain tolerance or it's how my brain like processes things, but a lot of things that medical professionals describe as like discomfort, I feel is like reasonably severe pain. Like I feel pain, and that has happened to me in many iterations of medical care where I'm told that something will be uncomfortable. It is really painful. I've also talked to peers and friends, though, who are like, oh, it wasn't that painful. And I'm like, okay. So for me, the first couple of weeks of breastfeeding are painful. Like I feel severe, I would say at times, amounts of pain. And it is not discomfort, it is pain. That is how my brain registers it. And then you're scrolling Instagram and you're told that breastfeeding should never hurt. And specifically, if there is pain, you are doing something wrong, that something is wrong. And the amount of conversations I had with my midwife where she would come and she would I'm lucky I didn't feel like it was a test, partly because it was probably going so well. The babies were putting on so much weight and I had so much milk. But I would hold and I would breastfeed my baby and be like, this is really painful. And she'd be like, well, it's it's perfect.
Yes.
But then you see experts online telling you that pain, it means something is wrong.
Yes.
And that's such a hard position to be in, where it's like, I'm being told something by, a figure of authority, albeit online, that something is wrong. But it's not. Like, sometimes things can just really suck. Like, I find the first couple of weeks of breastfeeding, it sucks. It's so hard. I kind of hate it. After that, we're all good. And I know I just need to get through that period. But that, like, conflicting information, which is also the other thing participants in my research talked about a lot, and I'm sure you've experienced as well, of just the conflicting information as well, and that you'll have some midwives or doctors who tell you like, no, you don't need a bottle, and others who are like, just go top it up. One of the participants was
and
talking
some
about
who
how,
will be like 3 hourly feeds, and some are like feed on demand. It's just different whoever comes in.
Yeah, really conflicting. And I had even participants say that some nurses or midwives came into the ward and they were like, look, if you need to top her up with formula, just lie to your LMC. Like, just don't tell your LMC if it's going to cause an issue. So you have, other medical professionals telling you to lie to the other medical professionals, and they're trying to help you with your shame, but it's also like so conflicting and confusing.
Yeah, totally. 100%. And then I was saying to Charlotte earlier, that I wrote out a bunch of stuff, and then at the end of this document have just added in a bunch of extra things that I feel like we need to touch on, that I want to touch on, that I didn't write out really great or properly, and so we've got to that portion of the thing. But something that I did want to mention is that, like, this was a criticism of, like, a lot of the pushback around the idea of breast is best, and this happened right from when Penny and Andrew, what's his names, published their book about breast is best, was that, like, the wording of best means that immediately whatever other option we have available to us coincides with worst, because that's like the two, like, we've got breast is best, which means that formula is worst, which is not the case, but that is the flip that phrasing creates. And so even though nobody has come out and said formula is the worst, because the common phrase and the commonly held belief is breast is best, that is automatically what we're doing. So it's not going, well, we've got breast milk and then we've got formula, which doesn't have these amazing benefits that breast milk does, but it's still really good. And that is, I think, for me, if I could change anything about the way that we're setting parents up or talking about infant feeding, that is what I would like to change. I would like that to be the thing that changed. I don't need people to not talk about how amazing breast milk is. Like, I don't need that, and I don't think that that's healthy either. I think we need to be very open and educate well about the benefits of breast milk. But I do think that we need to be careful in how we're framing it to make sure that we're not saying, and then I guess if you can't do that, well, then I guess you have to give them formula. Shitty poison formula. Like,
shitty
because that's just like
So I just
shitty
wanna,
poison
like,
formula.
I really want to Photoshop that, like, onto, like, get somebody to do an illustration of that, like, on a formula can. It's called shitty poison formula, and then we can make t-shirts.
I was just saying that could be our first merch, is shitty poison formula. Oh dear. But actually, in my imperfect parents group, shout out Sophie, she's always very happy when I mention imperfect parents, the beautiful facilitator Kate lent me a book called Smart Mothering by Natalie Flynn. Have you ever come across this book? Basically, it's like kind of like this podcast in a book, except she's not funny, she's just very scientific, and it's just like parenting choices you can make and the evidence behind them. And the formula chapter basically just reassured me in my choice to feed Max formula for the betterment of my mental health, because it's not like magic breast milk, shitty poison formula. It's like, we have the breast milk, which is magic, and then we have formula, which serves the same purpose of filling up your baby with great nutrients and helping them grow and develop, And actually, I was speaking with a colleague who's a dietitian who I promised I wouldn't name because we're all scared of talking about breastfeeding. But I was asking her about like the comparison between the two. And she basically said that if you like zoom out, that breast milk and formula are pretty much the same in that they both achieve the job of feeding your baby in like a safe and nutritious and like nutrient dense way. And that it's only when you kind of like really zoom in and look at the like micro bonuses that breast milk has, like that's where the benefit is. So it's not like one is doing the job and one is not. It is like they're both doing the job exactly as they need to. These have these extra benefits, but those benefits would be like mitigated if like your mum was also like had raging postnatal depression because she's sacrificing her body. You know, like yes, there's benefits, but then there's also situations, or like there's so much situation where formula is the beneficial choice. Including just knowing that it's not the right choice for you. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
formula is just like, it's great, it's researched, it's well developed. It is like truly a miracle option for our babies. And so I think that's like where my rub is that like the nature and the way that we talk about this is that there's either like the good option or the bad option, but they're both
Yeah.
good options.
And I think that's a really good point with the phrasing. Like so much of what I end up talking about in both my master's and my PhD is just like language matters, and the inference in human language is really important. And I think that that's a really good point that you've drawn out there of like best implies the other option, because there are two options. There's breastfeeding or formula. You know, you can obviously mix and all of those things, but it's quite binary. So if this is best, then that is worst.
Exactly. It's like even today I was having the conversation with Freddie, like we were doing a race and he said, I won and you lost. And I said, no, you came first and I came second. And I think that's like the crux of it, right? Is that like it's not best and worst. It's like here's the thing with benefits, but then also like we talk about the health outcomes for babies who are breastfed, but also if you want to talk about health outcomes for babies, let's talk about maternal mental health and maternal well-being and how that mitigates the risks of so many things for children. And again, like it does. And whenever I talk about maternal well-being, I always want to say that I'm talking about that on like a societal, well-supported way, not just on the individual onus of like, mum didn't do enough self-care and now she's got postnatal depression. Absolutely not. Like that's not what I'm talking about. But I think if we're really invested in the well-being of our kids, then we need to think about maternal mental health, and that needs to be a valid enough reason for someone to make a choice to feed their baby formula. And if like,
well, and I think what we're consistently seeing here as well, right, is that, again, it's that like exertion of power over women's bodies to get us to do a whole lot of work that benefits everybody else in society and benefits governments and institutions. So we're more than happy to narrow down on child welfare in terms of like the benefits of breastfeeding, but we're not going to do a comprehensive, you know, because that is the decision of the mother and the work of the mother. So if we can just really ram home that breast is best, then we get all of these positive health outcomes by ensuring that women continue to do that, right? But we're not looking at other things like, as you say, maternal mental health and the outcomes of that on children and like funding it efficiently. We're not looking at the very real benefits for children with increases to paid parental leave and government welfare, because it's not the individual mother supplying that, it's institutions and governments. And we don't want to look at options that are going to cost money. We want to look at options that we can put squarely on the shoulders of women and tell them to do all of that work while we keep funding things we shouldn't be funding.
And that's like coming back to that Colin and Rami quote about like, if it's to increase breastfeeding, but you're focusing solely on individual behavior, like that's not actually changing anything. It's just stigmatizing people even further that you're trying to convince into breastfeeding their children. Like it's so backwards. We've got it so unbelievably backwards. And it's not a coincidence that it's such a gendered issue. Like if men were breastfeeding, this would not be the situation, obviously.
The world rests on women's unpaid labor is like one of my core beliefs.
Truly, truly. Like I mean, this could be a whole other episode. We're already 2.5 hours in, but you know, like,
Yeah.
it's just it's no coincidence that this is just something that we are so happy to squarely place on the shoulders of individual women and then make them feel like shit about. It's just like, it's not a surprise. The other thing that I did want to quickly acknowledge is that, like, I wish I'd said this a bit earlier. I might even edit it that way. We'll find out. But breast is best was like a deliberately radical statement because of the over-commercialization of formula and because that had caused mothers to believe that breastfeeding was a bad choice or the wrong choice. And so they needed something deliberately radical and inflammatory and something that would pique people's interest, which they did, like arguably an incredible PR job from the Breast is Best team, because like, man, it's stuck in wider brains, wider societal, what's the word I'm trying to find? I don't know. You get what I'm
Like in
trying
the
to
social
say.
consciousness.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to say. And so I think the fact that we ignore the nuance of the context in which Breast is Best came to be is like, it's like taking something and changing the meaning of it or changing the purpose of it, because Breast is Best was born out of like a very specific context and was coined for a very specific purpose of renormalizing breastfeeding, which is a really, like, arguably very good thing that was done for society, like very good. But now that it's being taken and used to shame mothers or to reinforce the idea that you must do this thing in order to be a good mother at the sacrifice of your own autonomy, your own mental health, your own whatever, with no support from wider structures, like, that is, I would say, using the term incorrectly because you're removing it from the context of the time that it was created in.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to wrap up, I was trying to think, like, how would I want to end this episode? I was struggling writing this episode because I didn't really know where I wanted it to land, because it's tricky. It's a nuanced conversation. I don't think there's ever somewhere that you're going to fall that, like, you can go, oh, well, here's the tidy bow and it's all great. But I think, like, for me, if I could think about what I wanted the infant feeding kind of like phrase to be, it would just be that, like, maternal well-being is best. And so for me, like, I can only ever bring it back to my experience because I have so much baggage coming into this episode, is like, personally, the relief that I felt when I knew I didn't need to breastfeed Max anymore. Like, I know that was the best thing I could have done for myself. And Pod Daddy knows that. And everyone around me knows that. Pod Daddy, shout out. He's going to be like, stop calling me that. But, like, I still feel guilt for the fact that I was producing enough milk to feed her and I chose to stop. And I still feel embarrassed telling people in the maternity space at work that I didn't breastfeed, even though I know that my colleagues hold no judgment about how women choose to feed their babies. Like, I talk to them every day. I see the amazing work they do. I know the passion that they have for women's autonomy. But women's, like, mental health is so tied up with autonomy and feeling like you're making your own decisions without coercion. And we all need to be, like, we should all be giving all the information and then just saying, like, how would you like to proceed with the information that we've given you and what you know of who you are and what you would like? How would you like to proceed? And trust that women know themselves enough to know what they'd like to do with their bodies and what's best for their families, because they do.
Amen.
And that is my episode on Breast is Best.
You did so well.
You did it. Thanks. I did it.
I don't know. I don't even think that was that controversial.
I hope not. I hope that people don't listen to it and go, well, all they want is for people to give their babies shitty poison formula.
Shitty poison formula is my new favourite.
So, thank you for tuning in, everyone. I hope you still like me after this episode. I thought a lot about it and wrestled with it. And if you hated it, don't give me feedback. I don't want to know.
I love that. That's how we wrap everything up. Like, and if you disagree, actually,
Not my problem.
I don't want to know.
Someone asked me in an Instagram Q&A this week if I've had any negative feedback from the podcast, and I said, luckily, podcasting is an opt-in form of entertainment, and so I'd like to share that here. We are an opt-in form of entertainment. If you don't like us, it's fine to opt out. See you next episode!
Done smart moms.
And that's it for today's episode. Don't forget to clear your calendars for July 28th for the grand opening of the new CF Creations showroom.
Get that direct from manufacturer quality without the middleman prices. Use our exclusive code DSM online at cfcreations.co.nz to lock in your special launch discount before it expires.
See you next fortnight!
Done smart moms.